The sun was already crawling behind the rooftops, painting the sky red. Dust clung to 9-year-old Kamsi's face like a second skin. Her tiny legs wobbled as she approached the compound, balancing the half-filled tray of groundnuts. She was barefoot, her slippers had cut on the road, her dress, soaked in clung to her skinny body. Her lips were dry, her eyes tired, but her hands still held the tray like her life depended on it. She stepped into the corridor slowly, peeping around like a thief. Then came the voice, a voice that made her soul jump out of her chest. "So, you're just coming back, Kamsi? Welcome, Her Royal Highness! Groundnut Seller of the Year!" It was her stepmother, Mama Bio, sitting on the veranda, fanning herself with a plastic plate, her face twisted with mockery. One leg up, the other leg resting on a stool. Beside her was a cup of Zobo she didn't even offer Kamsi. "Madam, say it again," Mama Bio hissed, throwing the fan aside. "You couldn't finish the market? Do I look like your late father?" Kamsi trembled. I was trying to finish it, but people weren't buying, and it was getting late, and slap! The tray crashed to the floor, groundnuts flying everywhere like bullets. Kamsi fell with a scream, holding her cheek, too shocked to cry. "Idiot! So because of you, Bio will now be sent back from school, You're tired? Did you trek to Jerusalem? You think education is free in this country?" She stood up and dragged Kamsi by the ear, pulling her closer like a stubborn goat. "Let me tell you today, before you bring shame to this family, I will unscrew you first. Do you hear me? I will dismantle your destiny with my bare hands." The neighbours peeked from their windows, but no one said a word. They had seen this too many times. Some whispered, "That girl Day suffer, no human being she be." Kamsi tried to pick the groundnuts from the dirt with shaky hands, but Mama Bio kicked the tray away. "Leave it. You're not eating tonight. In fact, you're sleeping outside. Since you like darkness, go and romance it." Kamsi's mouth quivered. "Please, Mummy. I was hungry. I didn't eat since morning." "Then eat your shadow," Mama Bio barked. She pointed at the corridor like it was a prison cell. "If I see you inside this house tonight, you'll return to your father in the grave." Kamsi picked a corner on the cold corridor floor. She lay down, hugging her knees, tears streaming quietly. That night, as mosquitoes feasted on her back and hunger chewed her belly, she stared at the stars and whispered, maybe God made a mistake dropping me in this family." The next morning, Bio came out of the room, wearing a school uniform and spraying perfume. "Mummy, can I take the 500 from your purse? We have practical tomorrow." "Yes, take it, my baby," Mama Bio replied sweetly, patting him. Then turned back to Kamsi with a hiss. "That's the same money you couldn't hustle for." Kamsi looked at her step-siblings. They were all well-fed, well-dressed, well-educated, while she ate nothing, wore rags, carried weight bigger than her own body, and was never allowed inside a classroom. She washed their plates, she ironed their school uniforms, she fetched their water, she even cleaned their shoes. Yet she wasn't even called by name, only insults. Idiot, house rat, useless goat, free house girl. That night, she wasn't just sent to the corridor. Mama Bio poured water on the floor. "Since you like to suffer, sleep inside the cold properly. Maybe it will wash that laziness off your skin." Kamsi curled into herself, pressing her knees to her chest. As she lay on the wet floor, she could hear Bio laughing in the room, watching cartoons, eating fried chicken. And her thoughts screamed inside her tiny head. "If I die here, nobody will even care." 5 years had passed, but nothing had changed for Kamsi. She was now 14 years old, taller, stronger, but still a prisoner in the house where she once lived with her father. Her childhood had been exchanged for laundry, hawking housework and serving breakfast to the same children she trained with her blood. Bio, her stepmother's first child, was now in her second year in university. Liza had just gained admission, and Junior was preparing for junior secondary school examination. The school fees had doubled. Hostel fees, textbooks, pocket money, everything. Kamsi still hawked, now carrying a bigger tray with plantain chips, sachet water and groundnuts. The loads were heavier and the streets more dangerous. Yet she never saw a kobo of her own. One night, Kamsi overheard them talking while she was mopping the floor. The conversation cuts deeper than a knife. Mama Bayo, with her wrapper folded, sighed and said, "I don't even know what to do anymore. I don't want you children to drop out of school. We've already borrowed from everyone, and what Kamsi is bringing in is quite small. I have sold all I could sell, and selling this house would render us homeless." Bayo from the bedroom added, "Mommy, I have been thinking, let Kamsi go and do housemaid somewhere. Let her bring in real money. She's grown now. She just ain't waste here." Liza joined in. "True talk, Mama. Sell her. Use the money wisely. That's what some people do. She's no more useful. The money she's bringing, it's quite small, and I don't want to drop out of school." Kamsi paused, her hands frozen on the mop. "Did she hear that right? Sell her?" She pressed her lips together. She had learned by now, crying was a waste of water. 2 weeks later, a black car drove into their compound. An old woman stepped out, elegant, calm, and strangely observant. Her name was Madame Justina. She said she needed a young girl urgently to help her with house chores and keep her company. Mama Bayo's face lit up like Christmas. "You are very lucky, oh madam. I have one useless girl eating free food here." "You can take her today, Seth." Kamsi stood near the gate, listening. No one called her. No one explained. No one asked her opinion. They simply packed her small clothes into a nylon bag, handed her over like a loaf of bread, and collected 150,000 cash in full, and said, "As we agreed, you are to be paying 50,000 naira monthly." Madame Justina nodded. "I will do that until she's 18 years or better. Still, I will pay off, so she can become mine forever." Kamsi turned to look at Mama Bayo and said quietly, "You're selling me? Just like that?" Mama Bayo laughed and rolled her eyes. "At least now you're finally useful for something. Don't go and disgrace me. If they send you back, I won't take you." The car door shut. The engine started. Kamsi looked back one last time. No one waved. No one cried. Not even her step-siblings. The car came to a slow stop in front of a quiet compound, surrounded by flowers and trimmed hedges. Not a single person shouted. Not a single child screamed. No gateman barked orders at her. It was peaceful. Kamsi stepped out slowly, holding her small nylon bag, the only thing she now owned in the world. Her eyes scanned the compound. The floors were tiled. The plants were watered. The air smelled like lemon and calm. She tightened her grip on the bag, her hands shaking slightly. "Follow me, my dear," Madame Justina said gently. Kamsi nodded, but her legs felt heavy. She was scared, not because the place looked bad, but because it looked too good to be true. Inside the house, the floor sparkled like glass. The walls were painted cream and gold. Every piece of furniture looked expensive and untouched. Yet the house felt warm. Not the kind of warmth that comes from money, but the kind that comes from quiet respect. They got to the room she would stay in. Madame Justina opened the door and said, "You'll sleep here. If anything is missing, tell me." Kamsi blinked. She looked around. The room was small but beautiful. A soft bed, clean bedsheet, a wardrobe, a small fan. She placed her bag down slowly, like someone afraid to wake up from a dream. "Thank you, Ma," she whispered, confused. "No need for Ma every minute. You can call me Madame Justina, or just Madam. That's fine." Kamsi nodded again. The next morning she woke up early, by habit. She tiptoed out, expecting to see buckets lined up, clothes to wash, toilets to scrub, firewood to fetch. But instead there was a list on the fridge. "Your new routine. Sweep the sitting room, clean the dining table, water the front plants, help in the kitchen if needed." That was all. She stood there for almost 10 minutes, reading it over and over again. "This is all?" she asked the cook later. "Yes, now," the woman smiled. "Are you used to doing more?" Kamsi nodded slowly. "In my former house, I washed 7 buckets daily, cleaned 2 toilets, cooked 3 times, hawked, ironed and fetched water. I wasn't just a house help, I was also their ATM machine, training 3 children in school at the same time. The cook's face changed. You, at your age? Kamsi smiled weakly, not proudly, just the smile of someone who had survived too much. It's okay. At least I'm useful to people. That day, Kamsi finished her work in 1 hour, and she didn't even hear a single insult. No slap, no harsh command, no punishment. She wasn't asked to kneel down or sleep outside or beg for food. When lunch came, she was invited to eat on a small kitchen stool. They gave her food in a proper plate with a spoon and cold water to drink. She almost cried. "Are you okay?" the housekeeper asked her. She nodded. "Yes, I'm just not used to this. The last time I had this treatment was when my father was alive." That night she lay on the bed, soft, warm and safe. No mosquitoes, no hunger, no beatings. But she couldn't sleep. Her body was calm, but her mind was still trapped in pain. She remembered Bayo's mocking laughter, Liza's wicked words, her stepmother's voice saying, "Useless girl." She turned on the bed and whispered, "Is this what life feels like for normal children?" For the first time in her life, she closed her eyes and slept like a human being. 3 months later, the compound was unusually quiet that afternoon. The sun had bowed its head behind the clouds, and a soft breeze danced gently through the curtains of the maids' quarters. Kamsi was in the laundry section, humming faintly as she scrubbed a shirt when she heard the low grumble of an engine. A black SUV slowly pulled into the driveway. It was polished like a mirror, the kind you see only in magazines or in the lives of the rich. She dropped the shirt and peeked curiously from behind the curtain. The back door of the car opened. Out stepped a young man, tall, handsome, and neatly dressed. But there was something unusual. He held a walking stick and wore dark black shades, the type used to cover wounded eyes. Kamsi's breath caught in her chest. The head chef, who stood nearby, leaned closer to her and whispered, "That's Madame Justina's only son." Kamsi looked at him again. His steps were slow, careful, too careful. The chef continued, "He was involved in a terrible accident about 4 years ago. Since then, his eyes haven't been the same. He just came back from another surgery abroad. We're all praying this time it works." Kamsi's heart ached. She stared at him, confused at how someone so full of life could look so lost. He didn't speak to anyone as he was led into the house by a male staff, his stick tapping the ground softly with each step. Later that evening, while Kamsi was clearing the flower vases in the living room, the head housekeeper called her upstairs. "Madame Justina wants to see you, in her private lounge." Kamsi's heart skipped. She quickly cleaned her hands and hurried up the stairs, trying not to imagine what she might have done wrong. Inside the richly furnished lounge, Madame Justina sat cross-legged, sipping from a teacup, her long scarf resting gently on her shoulder. "You sent for me, ma?" Kamsi curtsied. Madame Justina gave her a long look, then smiled softly. "Yes, sit." Kamsi hesitated. "Sit." She never sat unless asked twice. "I said sit." She obeyed quietly, perching at the edge of the seat like a bird ready to fly. Madame Justina leaned forward. "You've been doing well, Kamsi, very well in fact, but I want to add more responsibility to your work." Kamsi's eyes widened, her heart dropped. "More duty?" Madame Justina continued. "From now on you'll be the one attending to my son." Kamsi froze. "Me? Yes, I need someone patient, humble and careful. Move with him around the compound, help him settle. Anything he needs, call me if it's above you. He must be comfortable. And I trust you." Kamsi swallowed hard. She didn't know whether to feel honoured or terrified. She had never attended to a blind person before. She nodded gently. "Yes, ma. I will do my best." Madame Justina smiled again. "Good girl." As Kamsi walked out of the lounge, her mind raced with questions. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I hurt him by mistake? What if he doesn't like me? But deep inside, beyond the fear, she felt something else. A strange kind of warmth. A chance to finally serve with dignity. To be needed, not used. To be seen, even by someone who could no longer see. That afternoon, Kamsi, standing nervously by the polished doorframe, had her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her heart pounded, not from fear of the house, but of what awaited her inside the room. "Go on," the chef had encouraged moments ago. "Just greet him, he doesn't bite." She had nodded. But now, facing him for the first time, she felt her confidence crumble. There he sat, Madame Justina's only child, on a sleek recliner with his dark shades on and a walking stick resting beside him like a silent companion. His face, though undeniably handsome, held a permanent frown, and his lips were pressed together as if the world had done him wrong. She took a deep breath and stepped forward slowly. "Good afternoon, sir." He tilted his head. "Is that?" His voice was sharp, like a blade freshly drawn. "It's me, Kamsi. Madam said I should—" Before she could complete the sentence, he cut her off with a voice full of contempt. "You were assigned to work with me, and you don't even know my name?" His head turned sharply in her direction. "That means you must be an illiterate. Did you go to school at all?" The room grew cold. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Kamsi swallowed hard, biting back tears. I stopped going to school the day my father died. I was just 8 years old then." There was a long silence. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a short, bitter laugh. "A pure illiterate, then," he said with a twisted smile, as if mocking not just her, but fate itself. Before she could respond, he pressed a silver button beside his chair. A soft chime echoed, and within seconds, Madame Justina entered. "Yes, darling, what is it?" she asked, concerned. "Mom," he said with irritation, "why would you assign someone like this to me? An illiterate? How can she assist me when she knows nothing about me, not even my name? I won't accept it. Send her away now." Kamsi's eyes dropped to the floor. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Madame Justina turned to her, and though trying to maintain calm, her voice was stern and clipped. "Please excuse us for now. You can step out." Kamsi nodded quickly and left the room, her head bowed. But inside her chest, a quiet ache began to grow, a mixture of humiliation and something she couldn't yet name. She didn't cry, she didn't complain. She simply walked back to the servant quarters and whispered to herself, "I will not disappoint, madam. I will learn. I will try. No matter how hard it is, I will not fail." The next morning, Kamsi stood outside the young man's door, hands clasped tightly, rehearsing his name over and over in her heart. "Brian, Brian, Brian." She whispered it like a secret, afraid to forget, afraid to fail again. Madame Justina had spoken to her earlier that morning with a softer tone than usual. She gently placed her hands on Kamsi's shoulders. "Don't take his words to heart," she said, eyes tired but kind. "Brian has been through a lot. The accident changed everything for him. He wasn't always like this. Try again, Kamsi. Be patient. If you're willing, you just might reach him." Encouraged but still scared, Kamsi knocked lightly on the door. No response. She knocked again, gently pushing it open. Brian was sitting on the edge of his bed, dressed in a simple black shirt, his walking stick resting by the nightstand. The black shade still covered his eyes, his face blank but stiff with pride. "Good morning, sir, Brian," Kamsi said softly, standing a safe distance away. A pause, then a slow, bitter chuckle. "You learnt my name," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Should I clap for you?" Kamsi swallowed and said nothing. She knew silence could be safer than words sometimes. Brian tilted his head toward her, though he couldn't see her face. "What do you want now? Come to learn more names? Or maybe I should ask, what do you even know about me? About this house? About anything?" Kamsi stepped closer, her voice trembling but sincere. "I just came to check if you're okay, and if you'd like to take a walk." "A walk?" he scoffed. "With you? A total stranger I can't even see? Someone who probably doesn't know left from right?" Still, Kamsi didn't move. "I know you're hurting," she said quietly, "but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here to help." That made him pause. Then he leaned back slowly, face turning cold again. "You want to help?" he said flatly. "Where were you when I lay in a pool of my own blood on the cold pavement, listening to people scream and cry? Where were you when I woke up to find everything dark permanently? When I found out my friends stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped caring because I was no longer useful, no longer the cool kid who played piano and climbed trees? Where were you when I became a ghost in my own life?" Kamsi blinked back tears. Her heart ached hearing him speak, not just from pain, but from deep loneliness. "I wasn't there," she whispered, "but I'm here now." Another long silence. Then Brian turned his face toward the window. "I don't need pity. I don't need some maid trying to fix me like I'm a project. Just do your job and leave me alone." Kamsi nodded slowly, hurt but still standing. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. She turned to leave, but just before she reached the door, he said, "My name is Brian Donovan. Since you're going to follow me around like a shadow, you might as well remember it right." A tiny flicker of hope sparked in Kamsi's heart. He had told her his name again, not out of mockery this time, but maybe, just maybe, a crack in the wall had begun to form. A few weeks later. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The sun was gentle, the breeze was kind. Madame Justina had stepped out for a meeting, leaving Kamsi alone in the house with her son, Brian. Ever since their last conversation, he'd been a little less cruel, though still withdrawn and short with his words. That day, Kamsi quietly entered his room with a glass of water. She found him seated near the window, holding his walking stick like a staff of war. His black shades were off, resting on the table. For the first time she saw his eyes, dim, sunken, lost. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brian," she said softly. "It's Brian," he snapped without turning. "You've been told already." "I'm sorry, Brian," she replied, steady but gentle. He was silent for a while, then whispered, "You're walking so quietly. You always do that. Why?" Kamsi held the tray closer. "I'm used to walking on toes. In my father's house, if I made noise, I was beaten." Brian chuckled dryly, a humorless sound. "Wow! You and I both live in silence, but for different reasons." He paused again, fingers trembling slightly. "You know, 4 years ago I had friends. Many. They'd come around with PlayStation consoles, games, drinks, girls. My room was always full of noise, laughter, stupid arguments about football." Kamsi remained quiet, unsure where he was going. "Then one evening, we went for a birthday party. It was raining, but we were high on energy and speed. The driver warned us. We laughed. The next thing I remember was waking up in darkness, not because it was night, but because my sight was gone." Kamsi's eyes welled up, but she quickly blinked them back. "My friends? Gone, one by one. Nobody wants to hang out with the blind boy who can't drive, dance, or even see a movie. Even the girls vanished. I became a prisoner in my own house." His voice cracked, anger now rising. "I'm just 17, but my life is over. What kind of joke is this?" And then it happened. His walking stick clattered to the floor. Brian covered his face with his hands and cried. Not the quiet sobs of shame, but the loud, painful wails of a broken boy. Years of holding it in came out in one single moment. Kamsi froze. Then, slowly, she moved closer and knelt beside him. She didn't say a word. She didn't dare touch him. She just sat there, present, listening. That was the moment Madame Justina walked in. Her handbag dropped from her hand as she witnessed what her eyes never thought possible. Brian, crying. And Kamsi, still as water, a quiet strength beside his storm. Her chest tightened. Something broke in her heart, and something healed at the same time. That night, she made a call. The next day, an envelope arrived at Mama Bayo's house, thick, sealed, and heavy with cash. And a note. Thank you for this, girl. The contract is sealed. She is forever mine. Mama Bio screamed. Bio jumped from the chair. Liza burst into song. Junior rolled on the floor laughing. Ah, God, this girl has finally trained my children in school. Mama Bio shouted, waving the envelope. She finally did what her father couldn't do for us. Bio danced. Liza clapped. I'll become a nurse. Junior mimicked her. I'll become a pilot. They danced through the night, and for the first time in a long while, laughter filled Mama Bio's house. Because of the money they received from Madame Justina that sealed the Camsies transaction. Years later, Brian was now 24. He had grown into a fine young man, handsome, intelligent, but still carrying the weight of the darkness that had blanketed his eyes for 10 years. Doctors had tried. Specialists had flown in. Hospitals abroad had welcomed him again and again. Yet nothing changed. Until now. A new doctor had given a slim but possible chance. This surgery may restore your sight, but it's the last viable attempt we can make. It was a week before the journey. Camsey had become more than just a helper. She was his friend, his routine, his silent strength. For days she'd been reading him stories from books on hope, positive thinking and healing. She would sit beside him and say, quote, "Your healing begins in the mind, Brian. Believe it before you see it." She read with a gentle tone, choosing passages about people who came out of pain, who saw light again, some literally, others emotionally. He said nothing most times. Sometimes he hummed, other times he sighed. But 2 days to the trip, as she read again about someone who regained their sight after years of blindness, Brian suddenly sat upright, his face twisted in frustration. "Stop! Just stop!" he yelled, startling her. Camsey froze, still holding the book open. "Do you even know how many years I've been like this?" he continued, his voice rising. "Since I was 14, Camsey! 14!" She tried to speak, but he cut in. "Top hospitals, best physicians, flying in and out like I'm some test experiment, and nothing has changed. Don't stand there and read fairy tales to me about healing and light. You think your soft voice will fix what's broken in me?" He shook his head, fists clenched. "Yes, I'm going for the surgery. Not because I believe in it, but because Mom paid for it. That's all. It's routine now, a cycle. Don't give me fake hope. Don't do that." His final words hit like a slap. "Get out, Camsey, please, just go." There was silence. She didn't cry. She simply closed the book gently, bowed slightly, and turned to leave. Before stepping out, she whispered softly, barely audible, "I believe, even if you don't." Then the door clicked shut behind her. Brian was silent and alone. He sat back down, tightly gripped his cane. He wept. He cried like he hadn't in years. Angry tears, lost tears, helpless tears. And outside the door, Camsey heard it. She pressed her back against the wall and covered her mouth, letting her own tears fall. The next morning was unusually quiet. Brian didn't come out for breakfast. Neither did Camsey, but their hearts had already begun a silent conversation. Madame Justina stepped out of her room, her face bare of makeup, her eyes red. She didn't say much, only ordered breakfast for 3 and had it placed at the dining table. 2 hours later, Brian's door creaked open. He stood there, tall but frail, dark glasses on, cane in hand, but his steps were slow, thoughtful, as if something was shifting. Camsey emerged too. She didn't look at him, just quietly took her seat across the table. Brian sat, said nothing. But midway through the meal, his voice came, low and tired. "You really think faith can fix this?" Camsey didn't look up immediately. She only placed her spoon down, folded her hands on her lap and nodded gently. "I don't just think, Brian. I believe." He didn't argue. For the first time in a long while, he didn't resist. Later that day, he let her read to him again. This time, he listened, truly listened. No interruptions, no scoffs, just quiet, deep breathing and the sound of her voice. She read about healing, about belief, about miracles that happened when everyone had given up. And as the hours drew closer to the trip, Brian's defenses began to loosen. He still didn't say much, but every time she finished a page, he would nod. On the final night before the flight, she knelt by his bed after reading. "I'll be with you all through," she whispered. "Just don't shut me out again." Brian slowly reached for her hand, his fingers shaking slightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Outside the slightly open door, Madame Justina stood again, watching. Her hand clutched a rosary she hadn't touched in years. Tears silently streamed down her face. "I was wrong," she murmured. "She's not just a helper, she's a healer." She stepped away from the door, but her heart remained behind, silently attaching itself to Kamsi's faith, desperate, aching, and ready to believe again. The next day, Madame Justina had finalized all the trip arrangements in silence. No cheers, no announcement. She only called Brian that morning and said softly, "We leave tonight." Brian's bags were packed by the staff, quietly, as if they were packing for war. He didn't say a word all day. He just sat in the garden chair, listening to the wind, tapping his cane against the floor until the car horn sounded. Madame Justina came down first. Brian walked slowly, step by step, to the car. Kamsi stood by the door. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only looked at him. And just when he passed her, she whispered, "Remember, if you lose your own hope, borrow mine." Brian paused. His lip trembled, but he nodded once like a soldier and entered the car.
At the airport.
Even the airport seemed to hold its breath. People stared, but not in pity, in awe. They had heard rumors. The blind billionaire who hadn't smiled in years was finally taking a shot at hope. Brian didn't smile, didn't flinch. He just held tight to his mother's arm and walked towards the private jet. As the wheels left the runway, Madame Justina finally reached out. She squeezed his hand and whispered, "This time, we won't come back the same." Brian didn't answer, but he squeezed back. At the hospital abroad. The hospital was world-class. Every hallway was white. Every step sounded like a verdict. Tests, more tests, eye scans, brain evaluations. Doctors from 6 countries flew in. They murmured in groups, studied charts, debated timelines. One of them looked at Madame Justina after a long discussion and asked, "Are you sure he wants this?" Justina turned to Brian. "Tell them, son." Brian lifted his head. His voice came out steady but sharp. "I want it. I want to see again, not because I believe I can, but because someone else believes for me, and maybe that's enough." The surgery day. The morning came with heavy clouds. It was as if the sky knew what was at stake. Brian was wheeled in. No one was allowed inside. Not even Madame Justina. She stood by the glass, her fingers trembling. Her lips moved with silent prayers. The surgery lasted 10 hours. At one point, the machines beeped erratically. A nurse came running out. Another one followed with blood bags. Madame Justina fell to her knees. "God, please, please, don't let me bury my child trying to fix him." The hallway was still. Then finally, the door opened. The chief surgeon walked out, his gown stained. He removed his gloves and looked at her. Madame Justina didn't breathe. Then he nodded slowly. "The surgery was successful. He's alive, and..." The nerves responded. She gasped, grabbed the wall, then sank into a chair, sobbing. Hours later, Brian was still unconscious, eyes bandaged. Kamsi had flown in and sat quietly by his side. Justina didn't speak. She just watched. Until Kamsi stood, leaned close to his ear and whispered, "When you wake up, Brian, I want to be the first thing you see." And behind her, Justina wiped her eyes, then whispered, more to herself than anyone, "And I want to see that smile again." Days passed. Recovery was slow, painful. Hope and fear danced in everyone's hearts. And now the moment had come. Brian was sitting in a private hospital room abroad, white bandages wrapped gently across his eyes. The lead surgeon stood ready, his gloved hands trembling slightly. A nurse hovered nearby. Madame Justina stood by the window watching the rain blur the world outside. She had paced all night, but now that the moment was here, she couldn't handle it. Her voice cracked. "Excuse me, please, I'll be right back." And before anyone could say a word, she walked out quickly, one hand pressed to her chest, the other wiping silent tears as they rolled down. Brian was left with Kamsi. She sat beside him, gripping his hand, firmly, faithfully. His hand trembled in hers. "Kamsi," he whispered, "do you think I'll see? I'm scared. This is my last chance." Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was soft, steady. "Then let me carry the hope for both of us. Just trust me, Brian. Even if you can't believe, borrow my belief. Hold on to it." The doctor began to unwind the bandages, layer by layer. The soft sound of fabric peeling back was the loudest thing in the room. When the last came off, silence. Brian sat still. His eyelids were closed. His hands clenched the chair tightly. "Brian?" the doctor called gently. "You can open your eyes now." But Brian shook his head slightly.
No,
I don't want to try. Not again. I can't handle another darkness. I can't." Tears spilled down Kamsi's cheeks. She reached up and gently touched his face. "Brian," she whispered, "please, open your eyes. I'm here. And this time, the light is too." A pause. Then, slowly, cautiously, Brian's eyes fluttered open. At first, they blinked rapidly. The light was overwhelming. Then they adjusted. His pupils widened, focused. And then he gasped. A loud, shocked breath. "Kamsi, I can see you." Her hands flew to her mouth in disbelief. "You can see," she sobbed. "Brian, you can see me?" He looked at her, her real face, not the version he had imagined for years. "You're beautiful," he whispered. Then he pulled her into the tightest hug of his life. Kamsi broke down in his arms, holding him as if he'd disappear again. The door opened gently. Madame Justina walked in, eyes red from crying, unaware of what had just happened. She stopped mid-step. Brian turned. Their eyes met. "Mother," he breathed. And in that instant, Madame Justina dropped her purse, rushed forward, and collapsed to her knees beside him, crying uncontrollably. "You can see me?" she wept. Brian reached for her hand, nodding slowly. She held him. Both her son and Kamsi all sobbed together. 6 months later, the sun was already high above the rooftops as Mama Bayo bent low, sweeping the dusty compound with a faded broom. Her back ached, but she didn't stop. She never did. Not when life had turned bitter. Not when her children brought her more shame than peace. Suddenly, the gate burst open. 3 stern-faced policemen dragged in Bayo and Junior, their clothes dirty and torn, their faces bruised with fear. One of them barked, "Where is their mother?" Junior didn't wait. He pointed quickly. "She's our mother! That's her!" Mama Bayo turned, startled. "Eh? What is going on here? Police, what for?" The oldest officer stepped forward. "They've been arrested for drug trafficking." Bayo's voice cracked in panic. Mama, please don't let them take us. It's just our first time. Please help us." But the officers were already dragging them away. Mama Bayo froze, broom still in hand, her lips trembling. She watched as her sons were taken and did nothing. Then from behind her came another voice. "I think we should call Madame Justina for help." It was Lisa, waddling slowly from her room, now heavily pregnant and clutching her belly. After all, she was the one with our ATM machine. Mama Bayo snapped. "You, this shameless girl, still giving advice with your cursed belly. Look at your life." But despite her shouting, something in Liza's words stuck. Mama Bio hissed, dropped the broom, and reached for her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed Madame Justina's number. It rang, once, twice, thrice, and then, hello? Madame Justina's calm voice finally came through. Mama Bio rushed. Madam! Please, Bio and Junior have been taken. But Madame Justina cut in gently. Please, call back later. There was music in the background, soft, elegant piano music and distant laughter. My son and Kamsi are getting married right now, she added with a smile in her voice. Please, don't disturb. And the line went dead. Mama Bio stood frozen. The phone slipped from her trembling hand and crashed onto the dusty ground. Liza blinked in shock. They're getting married? She whispered, her voice barely rising over the wind. Mama Bio turned slowly. Her lips parted, eyes wide, and for a moment it seemed like the world spun too fast for her to keep up. Then she let out a piercing scream. Kamsi is getting married to a billionaire's son! She staggered backwards, her hand over her chest. That Hawker girl? The same one we turned into a housemaid. The same girl we sent to another woman like a bag of Gary. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed on the wooden bench, sobbing violently. Oh God, this girl is now somebody's wife, and not just anybody, a billionaire's son. She turned her eyes slowly toward Liza, who now had her arms around her belly, protectively. And look at my own children. She hissed and rose to her feet, voice rising. 2 of them, dragged like criminals to the station for drug trafficking. And you, she jabbed a finger at Liza's stomach, a preg girl with no husband, no direction, no shame. Liza looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. Bio looked up at the sky, shaking her head bitterly. Kamsi trained you people with her sweat, her tears, while we treated her like dirt. She scrubbed, washed, hawked, just so you children could eat and wear shoes to school. She grabbed her head and cried again. Ah, God, this is how you work. She was the rejected stone. Now look, she's the bride at a billionaire wedding, and we are the disgrace of the town. She looked around at the empty compound and fell to her knees. I sold my miracle child. I sold her with my own hands, and now I'm left with shame and regrets. Liza sobbed quietly beside the broken bench. The only sound after that was the dry broom falling from Mama Bio's grip. Weeks later, the golden sun bathed the lush garden in a soft glow. Flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their petals brushing against one another like secrets being shared. Birds chirped, butterflies danced, and the once quiet mansion echoed with laughter. Brian was chasing after Kamsi with a water hose in his hand, both of them soaked from head to toe. Kamsi squealed, trying to dodge him, but she slipped and fell into his arms, laughing breathlessly. You cheated, she said between giggles, pushing back her wet hair from her face. Brian grinned. No rules in love and war, remember? They collapsed onto the grass, eyes locked, laughter softening into warmth. Brian held her hand, brushing his thumb across her fingers as he whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. You didn't just give me back my sight, he whispered. You gave me a reason to live again. They both smiled, lost in the joy of a love that had passed through fire and still bloomed. Kamsi leaned her forehead against his. You gave me hope when I had nothing left. We saved each other, Brian. Just a few feet away, under the shade of an old mango tree, Madame Justina sat on a long wooden bench, sipping tea and watching them with tearful joy in her eyes. She smiled deeply, as if recalling every chapter of pain and triumph. Then she spoke softly to herself, her voice filled with gratitude. I never knew I was bringing a miracle into my life the day I brought Kamsi home. Look at her now. Look at what this girl has done to my son. To me. She has beautified our lives in ways I never imagined. She wiped the corner of her eye and looked up at the sky. God, I thought I was saving her, but truly, she was the one sent to save us. Brian and Kamsi ran toward her, breathless from laughter. Brian took his mother's hand while Kamsi knelt beside her. Mom, Brian said with a smile, we're thinking of starting a foundation. For girls like Kamsi, girls who were thrown away yet still dared to dream. Madame Justina beamed. That would be the most beautiful legacy. And just like that, the past, the pain, the betrayal, the rejections, was behind them. What remained was love, laughter, and a future built on second chances. Dear besties, life may take you through pain, betrayal, mockery, and rejection, but if you stay kind, if you stay true, even the ones who sold you like a slave will live to watch you dance in royalty. From street hawker to billionaire bride, this was Kamsi's journey. My advice to you? Never look down on the poor girl today. She might be the queen tomorrow, and your fate might lie in her hands. What did you learn from this story, besties? Drop it in your language. Like, share, and comment. And always remember, you matter. Your story matters. Love you always, besties.